G'day, I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
And you're listening to Alternate Galaxies, our spin-off from the Doctor Who show where we look at other great sci-fi and fantasy. And tonight, Dave, of course, we're doing the second in our Lord of the Rings series, and we're looking at the film The Two Towers from 2002.
Yes, as per last month, Rob, you are an expert. I am a novice. I have seen this for the first time. What is it today? It's Tuesday today. I saw this for the first time 2 days ago.
Right. Well, in comparison, I'm an expert, but generally speaking, I'm just a guy who likes Lord of the Rings, I think.
How many times have you seen it?
This one, I would say no more than 10 times over the years.
Okay, well, you know, you're 1,000% more expert than me.
Every couple of years, maybe, yeah. Dave, I want to kick off by saying it's amazing what we didn't cover last time when I listened back to this. I didn't mention Enya's May It Be song, which closes out the movie at the end, or things like the recasting of Aragorn. They had a completely different guy cast for Aragorn. They were about to film. But could you imagine anyone but Viggo Mortensen being Aragorn, and so many other aspects we didn't go into. But I think at the same time we had a nice tight conversation. Our listeners seemed to enjoy it. Some even put their non-Doctor Who friends onto it. So thank you to all our listeners for that.
Yes, no, it was fun to do, and yeah, some really fun feedback. It's interesting when you tap into things outside Doctor Who suddenly gets a little bit excited.
Yeah, it's been good. And we'll have letters about this on our next monthly episode of the Doctor Who show.
We will.
Top level thoughts first, Dave. When we left off last time, you were saying that your interest was there in a general sense, but perhaps you were most interested in Sam and Frodo and what they did next. And I foreshadowed that this film would see the Fellowship in different places to one another. So now that you've seen it, did this film deliver what you wanted with Sam and Frodo? Did it go off course? If it did go off course, was it in a good way or a bad way? What are your top-level thoughts?
In answer to those questions, Rob, all of the above.
Oh, really?
I think one of the highlights of this film was the introspective stuff that happened with Frodo and Sam, and they are by far my favourite part of this trilogy. It was easily my favourite part of this movie, and they're absolutely my favourite characters. Frodo in particular, I just think it's a magnificent performance.
Right.
However, I do think that the movie went a little bit off the rails. Mm-hmm. I think that although I did have some criticisms about Fellowship of the Rings in terms of being a bit long and sort of taking a long time with the prologue before it really got to the story, I did say that once the story got going about 40-45 minutes in, there was a narrative that I was reasonably invested in, I was following, I was enjoying. It told a story that I liked, it told it well, and that left me with a very positive experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This movie started really strongly. It was a really strong opening. I remember watching the first 5 or 10 minutes and going, yeah, this is impressive. This has just hooked me straight in. There's none of this wasting
is interesting.
around.
Go on.
And then suddenly the movie just sort of went in about 14 different directions. Some worked, some didn't. But compared to the first movie, I really felt this one was just a little bit all over the shop. And as a result, whilst I thought 3 hours was long last time, I said at the time, I didn't really sit there looking at my watch a lot. Occasionally I'll sort of go, oh, there's an hour to go, that's fine. Or maybe I'll have a break here, or just go get some popcorn or something. But I watched it all very easily. This one, I was a lot more regularly looking at my watch going, what's going on? Where is this going? So it was a much more fragmented experience for me this time.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, broadly, we have 3 storylines. Frodo and Sam continue towards Mordor, now with added Gollum. Merry and Pippin escape the orcs. They meet Treebeard the Ent, and they help plan an attack on Isengard. And meanwhile, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli come to Rohan. They reunite with Gandalf, who's resurrected. He's now Gandalf the White rather than Gandalf the Grey. They join up with King Theoden, and they fight the legions of Saruman at the Battle of Helm's Deep. So I know you're exaggerating by saying there were so many storylines, but they're the 3 storylines, and it's interesting for, I think, any kind of film, let alone a sequel, that they don't resolve in terms of the characters coming together at the end. Their storylines running in parallel with no sort of crossover, which I think is very rare in films. Normally you have storylines running in parallel and then the characters come together. Something brings them together. That doesn't happen here.
Now, you see, I would say that there were 4 storylines.
Okay.
Because, yes, there's Tree Dudes, there's Frodo,
Yes.
and Gollum and Sam. Then there's one village with the king that was under the spell that all move into the Keller's Keep place. I just
Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep. Sorry, I just threw in a Hero Quest reference there. And then there's the David Wenham village that drops in later.
Okay.
I would have said that they were different plots. So I definitely saw 4 at least.
Right, okay, I see where you're going there. I'm sort of lumping in Wenham with the Frodo and Sam story, but of course, that's Faramir, he's Boromir's brother, he's from Gondor, and Gondor becomes a big deal in the next film.
Yes, and it was interesting as a novice viewer. I did spend a certain amount of my viewing having to spend some brain capacity on which dudes are from which town and where are they now and which characters are with them. Because the Gondor people and what's the other town?
Rohan.
And the Rohan people I found were not distinct enough.
Okay.
And so for me there were a few moments like I'm not saying I didn't know what was going on. It was terrible, but there was just a slightly higher level of hang on, he's with that dude there with that village and they're here now. There's just a little bit more processing needing to go on, and maybe if one had green armor and one had silver armor or something,
right,
that might have just helped me a little bit as a novice coming in.
Yeah, the rule of thumb, I guess the simplest way would be the Rohan people are very horse oriented, and the Gondor folk maybe aren't. So, I mean, even that gets confusing though, because you have Karl Urban and his bunch of Rohan riders who then split off from Rohan, and then he's sort of out in the wilderness doing his own thing. He's not really with the Rohan people until the end, where he comes back with Gandalf and does the mad charge down the hill. And
you've also got the bit where Gandalf brings the Gondor people on horseback to sort of save the day.
No, they're the Rohan people.
Well, as you can see, Rob, I did get a little bit lost there.
Yeah, that's the mob I'm talking about. That's Karl Urban and friends on horseback. Yeah, again, Rohan, very horse-oriented. They're sort of known as horse people because they live out on a plain and all of that sort of vibe.
Right, okay, because I thought once Gandalf rescues the king from the evil spell, that village all evacuates to the keep.
Yeah.
And then the Gondor people are the ones that have to come and join them later. But clearly there were 2 factions of other... Okay.
Yeah.
Look, as I say, it wasn't that I couldn't follow the movie. I still knew sort of the main turning pieces. I'm not sitting there going, I did not know what was going on. But clearly from this conversation, I didn't quite get which mob was with which mob. And so, maybe there were 4.5 plots here. And I was sort of a little bit struggling to sort of work out between 2.5 of them.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Earlier, you were saying that the start of the film really grabbed you, and I jumped in and said, "Oh, this is really interesting." Okay, why I think that's interesting is I was reminded this time around how the opening of this film doesn't grab me as much as the first film does.
Oh, okay.
The first one is like, here's a history lesson about the ring. We're back in time. Here's what happened with Sauron. Here's a big battle. Now we're in lovely Hobbiton, and funny stuff happens, and then things take a turn. Now things are more serious. What's going on? Frodo's off on an adventure. All of that is a very traditional opening to a film. Whereas this one, to my mind, opens up very much as a continuation of where we left off. So these guys are doing this, those guys are doing that. We're off to the races. And when you're looking at it as one huge adventure, when you sit there all afternoon and just play them one after the other, it's perfectly fine. In fact, it's fantastic. But when you're sitting down for the first time in a month with a clear head to start the film, I think it can throw you off a little. At least it sort of throws me off, even though I know what's going to happen, because it doesn't ease you in. I guess the only sort of thing we have at the start is the flashback to Gandalf fighting the Balrog, which is then possibly just a dream in Frodo's head. I mean, it's very exciting how they fall and fall and fall through the mountain and everything's on fire and Gandalf's stabbing the Balrog and all of that. But aside from that, it's just sort of like, okay, yep, we're in the wilderness, things are happening, off we go. And to me, that's not a very traditional way to start a film.
I totally agree with your characterisation of the start of the first film. I think it is a bit like a history lesson. And I don't particularly want a history lesson at the very start of my film. I want an adventure. And I think that a lot of films do make the choice to start with a hook, an action hook, something exciting to make you go, oh, okay, I'm sitting up and I'm taking notice. And then you can perhaps go down a gear, do a bit of the history, do the backstory, and then sort of build back up towards sort of the second act. And I think that's what this did. I did think that worked quite well. Yeah, I look, it worked for me. And look, in some ways, the first 15 minutes was the most exciting of the film.
Interesting. Very interesting, given the battle that happens at the end. I'd actually be interested, though, to go and watch the extended version now, because I remember with great clarity the third film, its extended edition, has a much better opening than the theatrical version. And now I'm just trying to remember what the opening of the second film was like compared to the opening of this film, whether it was similar or whether it was as wildly different as the third film's opening is. And I know you've not seen either of those openings, so you have no idea what I'm talking about. But I'm just curious for myself, and listeners out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. The extended version of the third film opens in such a different way to the theatrical version. It's incredible, actually.
I'll trust you.
So, Frodo and Sam continue to Mordor. They've now got added Gollum, as I mentioned. And gee, I think... I mean, you talked about CGI, I think, in the last episode, but I think Gollum's CGI is really starting to show its age at times, but still looks quite extraordinary at other times.
It is certainly of its time, but it is more than adequate to tell the story. And Andy Serkis's performance certainly gives it a life that goes beyond the CGI. So it works. And look, you're right, there were sort of a couple of moments, particularly sort of the big frontal face shots, we sort of look and go, ooh, okay. Details are not quite as good there as it would be 20 years or 20 more years later. But it absolutely worked, and the Andy Serkis stuff was very good. I found all that stuff quite interesting because I speculated at the end of the last film, in our discussion, that given Frodo and Sam were basically within, eyesight of Mordor, how do they spend another 2 films getting there? And I was quite surprised that about 20, 25 minutes in, they got to Mordor, and I was like, okay, wow. And then it's sort of a case of, well, how do we get in? And I started to think, are we going to have 1.5 movies of them trying to find a secret passage or something? And it was an interesting choice, but it certainly surprised me. As for Gollum, I really oscillated on this character. I was quite amused that the only bits of his clothing that still survive are 2 cloths that cover his rear and his front that somehow magically hang on.
Yeah.
That was quite amusing. I mean, just give him pants, just give him pants. Probably for the first 2/3 of the movie, I found him more irritating than anything. And look, I'm saying this as somebody who, when Dobby the house elf is killed at the end of the 6th Harry Potter movie, my reaction is that 6 movies too late. And there's a lot of sort of the pathetic begging Gollum, where I was very much in the, I'll just get rid of him, just kill him, just drop him here. He's just a pain. He's just annoying. Once he starts to turn and you start to get that return of the nasty Gollum, the whole world's against me Gollum, and I'm going to make them pay Gollum, I thought, oh, okay, this is now paying off, and I get where they've gone, and I liked where Gollum ended, but I did find that the first 2/3 of Gollum was just me going, oh, shut up.
Did you like where there are 2 Gollums on screen to show like the split personality or even the mental illness that he has, having lived, I think he's lived for about 400, 500 years because of the ring. He should just have a normal hobbit sort of lifespan because he was originally a hobbit. But he has lived long beyond that, and he is crazy. He has a split personality.
Yeah, no, I think that stuff was very well done, and when they lent into that stuff, I thought it was really, really good. So, as I say, I oscillated on this. There were moments of, that's really good, I like this character, and this character is just annoying me.
Fair enough. To go back to the Andy Serkis stuff, I agree. I think the performance really works because Andy Serkis really did crawl through streams and jump off rocks and throw himself about. out there in the wilderness. And the motion capture has all of that performance.
Yeah, and I wonder if you were doing this now, CGI is definitely even better, and you could definitely do it even better with motion capture now. I mean, just look at the Planet of the Apes movies. But are prosthetics so much better now that you would actually have Andy Serkis playing it in prosthetics?
Oh, that's really interesting.
And getting that full performance.
Yeah, of course, because it's his voice, it's his movement.
It's his eyes, it's his mouth, yeah.
And we know what a great actor Andy Serkis is via what he did in Andor, for example. In
Never more than
Jailbreak.
12.
Yeah. Like, just fantastic. And he can't swim.
No.
Yeah, I mean, this motion capture that we have back in the day isn't something they just cooked up on a PC and inserted into scenes and hoped for the best. It is a real person on a real set, much like Jar Jar Binks. So, yeah, I think if you did it the prosthetic way, it could be really interesting. Although in modern film, and now I'm thinking of, say, the Hobbit films, you had so much CGI that I think filmmakers are addicted to it. So would you have this very CGI sort of movie, but a prosthetic Andy Serkis running around in it? Would that just look weird for Gollum to not sort of blend in more with the added CGI that you would have these days?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I pose it without knowing the answer. I do I think, in favour of, if you can see, we're going back to John Pertwee and the Draconians here, if you can see their eyes, you can see their mouth, and it's all a real person, you're always going to get, I think, a more emotive performance. But then again, you look at the last Planet of the Apes movie, as I said, and there are some incredibly emotive performances from apes via motion capture there. So I don't know, but whichever way you go down, there are even better ways to do Gollum now, acknowledging that it worked fine, Serkis was excellent, and look, it was genuine cutting edge for the time. I totally appreciate that.
Yeah, agree. In terms of Sam and Frodo themselves, Frodo, I noticed, is really dark for much of this film. Really continuing on from the trauma he went through in the previous film. But towards the end, there are some lighter moments where Sam says, they'll be telling stories about you. And he's like, I want to know more about Sam, and he lightens up. The clouds part for a moment, and it's so nice to see after him being so haunted for much of this film. He's totally haunted in this film.
Yes, and this comes back to a theme that we really explored in our last episode about Fellowship, which is drawing on Tolkien's experience in the trenches and the way that shell shock and PTSD and all the rest of it can just absolutely change somebody's personality, but the comradeship of their close friends can lift them back out of it. I thought there really was something quite real and intense about Frodo in this that I really was gripped by. And again, the performance was, once again, the standout performance for this. And I really, really liked that. And I liked the way that Sam was that friend. A proper true friend is one who's there to support you, but also is willing to tell you when you smell and have to have a bath.
Yeah. or give you the bath.
Yeah, a proper friend, is honest with you and helps you fix what's wrong with you. And I liked that. I saw that in Sam. He was there to be the supportive buddy when needed, but equally the kick up the pants that Frodo needed sometimes, that only a real friend can give you.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I was just surprised at how dark he was from the start of the film. Obviously, I know he's traumatized in the first film, but in this one, it's almost like the lighting contributes to it as well. His face is so pale. His hair seems darker, almost black. He's got almost this gothic look to him in the film, and he's just so out of it and depressed. I was surprised, even again, I've seen this movie many times, at how they just drop you in it with Frodo straight away. He's stuffed from the start of the film.
And I think also I really reacted to the view of Mordor, because in my mind I sort of had, they walk into Mordor and they do something with the ring. And I think in Frodo's mind he also sort of had that, we have to walk to Mordor. And when you actually see Mordor and the fire and the walls and the guards and everything, I just sat there and went, how does he get in there? How does that happen? And I think Frodo must also have just had that real moment of, what do I do now? How do I finish this mission? I don't know how to finish this mission. I've got 90% of the way, but can't do the last 10. And that would be, very confronting. So I think that worked. As I say, the Frodo Sam stuff was, by some measure, my favourite part of this movie.
Yeah, and look, even before they get to Mordor, they walk through the dead marshes, and you have all those corpses underneath the water, which is just horrific. You'd never see something like that in the Shire. They're not in Kansas anymore, so to speak.
No, but again, it's the Somme.
Yeah, where you'd have bodies just under the mud. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Merry and Pippin, as we mentioned earlier, escape the orcs. They meet Treebeard the Ent and plan an attack on Isengard. I think this is probably the weakest aspect of the film, Dave. I think the Ents look really good. I think they're done amazingly well. And I think their attack on Isengard looks astonishing, where they're just picking up rocks and throwing them. And one of them catches on fire. I don't know if you saw this. It's down the bottom of the screen in one frame. His hair or his leaves are on fire, and he dips his head in the water that's coming out of the dam, which is almost like almost a comedy moment. It's really cool stuff when all that's happening. But when it's just Merry and Pippin sitting in the branches of a tree across a couple of hours whenever we cut back to them, it's not super dynamic. It's kind of interesting, and you kind of wonder where the Ents are going to go with this, and then they're not going to attack Isengard, so they sort of get tricked into seeing the devastation around Isengard. That's when they change their mind, etc., etc. It's just not very dynamic whenever we cut to this. Was this the weakest part of the film for you?
Yeah, Rob, you said that you think it's probably the weakest part of the film. It was bloody mind-numbing. By the final time when they cut back to Merry and Pippin sitting in some tree, and I've got to disagree. I actually don't think they look that good. I think they look like Jim Henson characters.
Oh, really?
It's something about the eyes, just like in this trunk, that just look absolutely fake. And by the last time they sort of cut back to Merry and Pippin sitting on the back of this tree that's just plodding along, talking vaguely unintelligibly, I did actually yell at the TV, "Oh, what are you doing?" and check to see the time. And we were 2.5 hours into that movie. So it's 2.5 hours of them actually not achieving anything. And it really did feel like they were just in a complete time warp, because there's all this other stuff going on. Other people have moved entire townships from one side of the country to the other and met these people and done these things, and these people can't walk a few hundred metres through a small forest. I was just utterly taken out of the movie every time those things came on in the first 2.5 hours. As I said, I thought they looked like Jim Henson puppets. I didn't think they looked good at all. They were boring. The time scale didn't fit with the movie at all, which dragged me out of the other parts of the movie. It was absolutely tiresome and terrible.
Even when they started striding and throwing rocks at Isengard,
I was going to say, after the first 2.5 hours, they finally got involved in the plot.
Right.
I did like some of it, and you're right, I did also highlight the tree that catches on fire and then is sort of flailing around, and that was a moment where I thought, okay, these aren't just trees, these are beings, and that's horrible and painful. And then he doused himself in the water, and I thought, okay, that sort of works. I thought that it was all a little bit too easy. They sort of strode in, threw some rocks, just turned on the tap, and suddenly Saruman's towers drowned. I just sort of thought, well, if that's all it took, why didn't someone else just turn the tap on, or break the dam, whatever they're doing? I'm being a bit facetious, I know. But it just sort of felt like, well, why didn't somebody else do that?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I actually wonder whether it's Peter Jackson's least liked part of the movie as well, because I've been hinting that the third film has a different start in the extended version, and it does relate to Saruman and Isengard.
Well, don't tell me anymore.
I won't tell you anymore.
Don't tell me anymore.
It does relate to that. I just wonder whether his boredom with it is why the theatrical cut was done in a certain way, but I say no more.
Yeah, and so the other thing that I just want to criticise about this plot thread is that we saw in Fellowship that Merry and Pippin are active, loyal, excitable, energetic, and that worked really, really well. They weren't always correctly focused. They didn't always channel their energy in the best way, but they were there, and they were always wanting to help. And having them just sort of sit it out on the back of a tree for 2.5 hours, I think does their characters a disservice as well.
Yeah, well, I think you'll be happier with the next film with regard to both of them.
Good.
And finally, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli come to Rohan. They are reunited with the resurrected Gandalf, who's now Gandalf the White, and they join up with King Theoden. They fight Saruman's legions at the Battle of Helm's Deep. I think this is the meat and potatoes of the film, Dave, although earlier you were saying that you like the start, I guess, more than this. I mean, visually, this is huge. It's where the action is. We get dwarf tossing, we get Legolas riding a shield like a skateboard down the stairs. We get that moment when all is lost, and then at dawn, look to the east, and they look to the east, and there's Gandalf. I think it's very cool, the ending of this film. Did you not like it that much?
No. I'm not saying I didn't like it at all. I'm certainly not saying that.
Okay.
I think this did two things better than the first film, and one thing worse than the first film. Mm-hmm. The two things that did better are clearly scale. The scale is impressive. The scale is quite staggeringly impressive. So that's a definite plus. The other thing is that it really saved that meat for one big chunk at the end. You recall last time I sort of complained about every 20 minutes another random bunch of orcs has to rock in because we don't want to get a bit bored.
Yeah.
Whereas this time they really sort of saved it for one big confrontation. I thought that worked very, very well. What I don't think worked as well as the first film, felt more personal, and it felt like there were real stakes because it was smaller and there were characters that were hurt and eventually killed. And that worked really, really well. Whereas when you sort of have the brave 3 against the 10,000, you don't quite get that personal thing. And it felt a little bit like our main characters all had plot armor in this one. And so you have some really fantastic scenes of just sheer weight of numbers behind the orcs, meaning that they break through the barricades and they break through defences and they look unstoppable, and that's really, really effective. That was really, really good, so I enjoyed that part of it. But after you have that, and again, a really nice actual character moment where the two of them are like, you'd have to throw me, I can't jump that far, and that sort of just moment of, okay, dude, we're going over the top. That was a nice little moment. But once they did, it was sort of like, well, because they're main characters, they can just swing their axe and 14 orcs fall down at once. So it cheated a little bit in that sense. There was also another cheat at the start of that battle, Robin. I know you liked my tweet that I felt compelled to send at one particular moment, which was, so they've got gunpowder now? And I did go into work to see my work bestie on Monday, who is a big Lord of the Rings fan as well, and I said, I saw the Lord of the Rings Two Towers and da-da-da. I said, now, just out of interest, do they use gunpowder ever again in this trilogy? He said, no, I don't think they do. I said, okay, so it was a massive cheat.
Yes and no. I'm okay with it, because I've had time to think about it now that you sort of tipped me off with that tweet that you wanted to talk about this. Because in an on-screen sense, it's created by Saruman, who's quite an adept wizard. He'd have some idea about creating this kind of thing. It's not the orcs that cook this up, it's Saruman. But even in an historical sense, you think of when the Chinese got gunpowder, it was still an age of stone castles, swords, armour, and so on. So either in a story sense or analogous to the real world, I think gunpowder can exist in this sort of world. It doesn't really take me out of the story at all. I'm cool with it. I get more taken out by the guy who's going to light the gunpowder. He comes running like he's got the Olympic torch from 1956 in his hand, and he sort of runs down a corridor of orcs like they're cheering him on, like he's about to light the Olympic flame. That sort of takes me out, because I'm buggered if that's not a deliberate sort of visual that they're trying to ape there. But the actual existence of the gunpowder, I'm cool with.
Yeah, it's a really interesting few moments for me, because I went through so many conflicting emotions in the space of about 2.5 minutes, because there was this incredulity of them having gunpowder. And I'm not against them having a level of technology that includes gunpowder. That's fine. It's okay. The fact that this is the one time they use it. Like, if they'd invented gunpowder or whatever the Middle-earth analogous of gunpowder is, surely there are plenty of other times to have used it as well. So I did think it was a cheat in that sense. I also found the depiction of the dude running with a torch a little bit comical, but at the same time, I absolutely bought into the tension of stop him, as he inches across, and knowing that, disaster if he gets there, and he's there's an arrow, no, it didn't work, oh my God, I was captured by that moment. So on one hand, I'm going, oh, come on. And the other I'm going, tee, and the other I'm going, oh my God, no. So it was amazing to have this confliction of emotion. So look, I did like that moment. The other thing that I did appreciate about the film was I spent the whole of the movie sort of waiting for the big Deus Ex Machina. I was waiting for this piece of magic or this, oh, we've suddenly discovered this dwarf artifact or something, and then I'm going, oh, they're not doing that. It's just a pure, hard, blood, sweat and tears fight. Okay, credit to them for doing that. Then Gandalf came over the hill and I was like, oh, I guess Gandalf's going to wave his staff and oh, no, Gandalf's just going to ride into them and just beat people up with his staff. Okay, we're not cheating. So I did give it credit for actually sticking to those rules and not having a big plot device to win the battle. It was just a hard-fought win against the odds. So I did like that, but I appreciated the scale, I appreciated the plot. I just felt that it lacked the individualism and the humanity, if you like, of the first film's battles, because there was this sort of sense of plot armor around the main characters in this middle film.
Okay. Well, I'll get to the battle in a minute because I've got some thoughts there. I will say the Gandalf thing, I mean, it's very well signposted. He says earlier on in the film, on the fifth day, look to the east at dawn, and I'll be there, sort of thing. So you kind of know that's going to happen, especially when dawn breaks and they look to the east. I like the way that when they're galloping down the hill, the orcs move their, I'm going to say pikes, but they're probably more like sarissas, like Alexander's army used to have those really long spears.
Yeah, pikes will do.
Yeah, they move them forward and you think, oh, this cavalry's going to ride into pikes. But then, I'm not sure if it's just the sunlight or whether Gandalf does a magic trick, but the light over the hill blinds them and they all sort of get disoriented and the spears sort of go every which way, and that allows the cavalry to be more successful. And I think that's a really nice touch.
Yes, I did notice that moment because it reminded me of the Battle of Agincourt. Not that I was at the Battle of Agincourt, you understand, and personally remember, but having read a lot about
Are you an immortal, Dave?
Having read a lot about the Battle of Agincourt, that was absolutely one of the strategies that the British used against the French to win that battle.
Oh, there you go. But to the Battle of Helm's Deep, I think it's really well done from the point of view that before it starts, there are plenty of overhead shots and scenes that are filmed in a way that you understand the terrain and the buildings really well. You know there's an outer wall. You know there's an inner wall. You know there's a keep. We're told that there are caves deeper into the mountain via the way they're saying, take the children into the caves. So when the battle comes, we already understand who's attacking where, what the fallback position is, and so on. And compared to the battles in some films, I think this one's really understandable. And it's all thanks to how those scenes play out in the lead-up. You're actually being trained to understand the fight without realising you're being trained to understand it. And then when it happens, you just understand what's going on and where everyone is and what they're trying to do. And I think it's really clever in that way.
Yeah, it was set up very, very well, and I certainly felt there were echoes of the Siege of Masada in that. And I've been to Masada and seen it, and so I certainly got a sense of that kind of vibe as well.
Cool. Yeah, it's really good stuff. There is a bit of a Hollywood cliche, though, with the Battle of Helm's Deep, and I think that's the arrival of the elves. Improbably at the last minute, all these elves who have previously been going away to the Undying Lands, getting on ships and leaving Middle-earth, suddenly there's just a whole army's worth of archers who just turns up at the last minute. That's very Hollywood cliche, but it is pretty cool at the same time.
Look, it was, but I'd much rather that version of the Hollywood cliche than the plot device, Deus Ex Machina resolution Hollywood cliche. If I have a choice between the two of them, and look, you've got to have one. You've got to have something that changes, that flicks the battle from, or flicks the odds of the battle from the people who have no chance to suddenly having an even chance. There's got to be a thing that does that, because if they're the favourites from the start, there's no drama. And if they're all wiped out, there's no third movie. So, so I get they've got to do something. I'd much rather that than Gandalf arrives and flicks his wand and suddenly they all win.
Yeah. No, that's fair. On the topic of Hollywood cliches, though, you were talking about the three main guys in this battle having plot armor. Earlier in the film, though, Aragorn does go off a cliff down into some water, and he's presumed lost, maybe drowned. There is the Hollywood cliche that he manages to not drown after being washed unconscious down a huge river, and his horse revives him and the horse carries him back to where he's meant to be. That's cliche. But for a moment, you're not too sure what's happened to Aragorn for a while in the film.
Yeah, it didn't really get me, A, because it was so perfunctory. I just thought they're not killing Aragorn that perfunctorily. But also, like, the Hollywood rule, the TV rule, that if you don't see the body, they're still alive.
Yeah, that's fair enough. We mentioned Boromir's brother Faramir earlier. This is sort of coming as a question without notice. It's not really in the running order of our conversation here. But were you expecting anything like that, Dave, for Boromir to have a brother and for him to pop up in the story?
No, I was quite surprised that he did pop up. I was momentarily confused as to who he was. And then I sort of had hey, is that David Wenham? Hey, yes. It is David Wenham.
It's Diver Dan.
Yes, and I was about to say this must be just off the back of him playing Diver Dan in Sea Change. It must be off the back of that.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because for listeners outside of Australia, Sea Change was a pretty big sort of TV show in the late 90s here on the ABC. It was quite culturally significant. And he was the big love interest in that, the sort of the
heartthrob. Yeah,
the heartthrob everyman that the lawyer from the slick lawyer from the big city who moves out has a sea change and moves out, and suddenly she falls for the down on his luck, down to earth man of the people bloke, and he's that bloke. So yes, I did sort of have that's David Wenham. Okay, I've heard of him, and that was good. He was very good. I liked his character. I liked his arc, but it did feed into another of my concerns about the movie as somebody who walked in completely not knowing the story. And it's funny, we talked about how in The Fellowship, just through sort of pop culture osmosis, there were multiple moments in that film I knew about. Whereas in this one, I don't think there were anything that I knew about it. There were no.
Really?
I don't think there were any of those pop culture moments other than maybe.
What about Gollum?
Oh, well, I knew of Gollum.
You would have seen Gollum, I'm
sure.
Yeah,
I knew of Gollum. I knew that Gandalf wasn't dead. I knew that they both were in this movie, but I didn't know any of the lines. I didn't know any of the moments. And, as I said, I knew the "You shall not pass" moment, and I knew that one does not walk into Mordor moment. Like there were moments in Fellowship I knew. There was nothing like that in this. So I went in completely in the dark, and so there were a few occasions where they would introduce a new town with a king or a new group with a leader, and it's sort of like, okay, hang on, who are these people that you want me to now care about? And I think that does feed into some of my opening comments about there being 4.5 plots going on, several of which introduced whole new groups, and I never quite worked out how each group related to each other and who they all were. And even the king dude, Theoden. I liked him by the end of the movie, but when he's just a sort of a dribbling mess on the chair, I was sort of like, why do I care? He's not linked to any character that I care about. I don't care about him per se. The whole township's just been introduced out of the blue in this movie, so I was sort of like, okay, well, you just introduced all these people and things, and you need me to care about this dude who's just sort of pathetically dribbling. And
I guess there he's got the character Grimer Wormtongue whispering in his ear and poisoning him, and Wormtongue is working on behalf of Saruman. I guess, if anything, you're meant to feel anger because you can see that this slimy guy is whispering in this king's ear and has warped him and changed him and made him disassociate from his people and all of that.
Sure, but if I can give you an example of how it's done differently, and for all movies I'm going to use to do this, it's going to be Disney's Aladdin, but bear with me.
Okay.
when you watch Aladdin, you meet Jasmine, who's clearly the romantic lead, and the love interest for Aladdin himself. You meet her father, the Sultan, and you see that the Sultan's, a bit ditzy, but basically a good guy, and, he wants what's best for his daughter, although he's a bit old-fashioned and all the rest of that, but he's basically a nice guy, and he's well-intentioned, and, he's not going to force his daughter to marry someone she doesn't love, even though he's a bit frustrated that she won't pick someone. And then you see how his Jafar is whispering poison into his ear and controlling him with his snake staff and manipulating him. So when he is manipulated and when he does make decisions that hurt Jasmine and hurt Aladdin, you're like, oh, that's not fair. That guy's manipulating a guy. And I like him and I like his daughter and I care. Yeah. Whereas this one, we're introduced to him already as a dribbling mess. So I think that it lacked that first part for me where I go, I've met these people and I care. It was just, I've met you and I don't care. By the end of the movie, as he was rescued, I did care. And I liked the decisions that he had to make. I liked the way that he had, real impossible rock and a hard place decisions to make about whether to evacuate his people, whether to join the battle, whether to join his troops. They were really good and I liked that in the second half. But I think that he wasn't set up well enough in the first half. So although I got that Wormtongue was an evil, manipulative bastard, did I care that much? And did I care that much when he got his comeuppance? No, not as much. And I'm also curious to know whether his parents named him Wormtongue and just assumed that was the career he would go into, or is that a nickname? It's kind of like Scar in The Lion King. Like, did his parents call him Scar and one day he just had a really bad accident, or what?
Nice. And of course, Theoden does have that very, very cool moment in the Battle of Helm's Deep where he's just like, bugger it, just open the doors, we're going to charge these pricks, Yeah. And they charge out of the doors. Oh my God, that's a great part of the film, Dave.
Yeah, no, there were many, many good bits in this, and that's kind of the thing I keep coming back to is there were many really good bits interspersed with bits where I was a little bit confused or a little bit underwhelmed, or we just had a dumb walking tree.
Yeah, fair enough. You mentioned, now rewinding a couple of conversations ago, how there were no sort of pop culture references you got here. I'm going to bring up a couple, both of which you'll know, but you might not have been thinking of directly. In the first episode, I mentioned Gandalf falls at the bridge of Khazad-dûm.
Yes.
And of course, Sheridan falls at Zahar-dûm. Both of them are resurrected. Also, in the Ahsoka series, after Ahsoka's little misadventure, she comes back wearing all white clothing, like she's been reborn as Gandalf the White. So there's a couple of references in shows I know you've seen, which I think are riffing hard on Lord of the Rings. Oh,
absolutely. There were a couple of moments where Gandalf did or said some things and I've gone, that really is Sheridan in Babylon 5. And remember that you told me that the pit was Khazad-dûm. And I was like, oh, that's right. But again, that was B5 riffing on it in a way that I didn't recognise. It wasn't, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. Hollywood cliches, I've just thought of another one. They try and wedge in this romance between Aragorn and the Shield Maiden from Rohan. And I don't think it works because, Aragorn is obviously very into Arwen. He wears that piece of jewellery from her. He's not going to cheat on her or anything. But they still really, trowel in this, Miranda Otto is really into, Viggo Mortensen in this film. How did that sit with you? Did it need to be there?
I thought it was totally superfluous, particularly because for the first half of it, I thought she was into the dwarf. Oh, because initially she and the dwarf are exchanging these knowing looks, and I'm like, that's interesting. A little bit of cross-species romance. That's kind of different. And then I realised that they're just exchanging knowing looks because he knows that she's really into his mate.
Yeah, they do have some funny conversations. I think he has a conversation with her about dwarf women. And you can't tell the difference because of the beards or something. Yeah,
he does. And I thought, they're flirting. He's telling a few jokes. She's sort of like, I kind of like this guy. And then it's like, actually, no, I'm just into the tall, dark stranger at the back. So no, look, and it kind of goes nowhere. Look, I don't think that romances make anything better.
No.
I'm very boring in that sort of sense. You know, I don't need Deanna Troi to fall in love with people in Star Trek. I don't need the Doctor to fall in love, and you know, I don't need a romance in Lord of the Rings either. So it was superfluous. But I think I probably would have liked it if she was into the dwarf. I think that actually would have been slightly cool.
Yeah, I think it smacks of interference by the studio. I think even having Arwen have an expanded role in the first film was that, and then in this one, it's like, well, what have we got for the ladies? You know, what are we going to put in here? I don't think Peter Jackson would have wanted to have done this because it is superfluous, as you say.
It does feel very focus groupy, doesn't it?
Yeah. Interesting though to see Miranda Otto looking so young. I mean, she looks a lot older these days in, say, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, where she's like the matriarch of the household, and she's really changed a lot over the last 20 years.
Yes. Gandalf.
Take me there, Dave.
I'm not quite sure where I sit with Gandalf at the end of this movie. I said during our fellowship chat that I think McKellen makes some curious acting choices sometimes that I think work for some people. Like if you like that sort of slightly that slightly affected, twee, conceited sort of you know, British eccentric performance. I think that works for you. That's great. It doesn't always work for me, and I think even here I just sort of had this sense of, and maybe this is something I need to wait for the third film to be answered, but I really don't have any sense of why he was back. I got that he's now white and Saruman's white, so my assumption was that that's a senior level of wizard. If you become a white wizard, you're a senior level, and you get there via metamorphosis or something. You know, there's some caterpillar butterfly thing going on there. Maybe that was my headcanon. I don't know if that's right, and I don't know if that's going to be answered more in the third movie. So I sort of, you know, went along with that, but it's always that problem with wizards, in the same that you have the problem with Jedi, in that they're just powerful enough to get you out of plot problems when it's useful, and they're not powerful enough to not get you out of plot problems when you need the drama. And I think that Gandalf just sort of popping up to solve some problems here and there, then disappearing, and then not being able to solve other problems didn't quite work. And also, again, jumping back to this multiple different plots with different towns and different groups I couldn't quite distinguish between, there were moments when I kind of got confused about where Gandalf was. And the fact that I thought that the horse dudes were with David Wenham, not with Theoden, I think probably confused me a little bit more. So I don't know whether I'm meant to find Gandalf this epic character that I just think is absolutely incredible, or I'm meant to find him a problematic character. And I'm not quite decided yet on what I think of him. And maybe that's deliberate, or maybe it's just not hitting me. And I'm curious to see what comes of all this in Return of the King.
Yeah, well, I guess like in The Hobbit, Gandalf does a bit of running around behind the scenes, and the conceit there is that white horse he's got, who he mentions is called Shadowfax, and it's the lord of all horses, is apparently a very, very fast horse. And that's the conceit, that he is actually moving around the playing board a lot more than all the other characters, and that could be confusing actually to a viewer. I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Two quick things for me before we're done, Rob. Once again, I do need to mention the New Zealand landscape. It once again spectacular. It was once again beautiful, but they did a very good job of making it feel like it was a different part of Middle Earth. They did go to different parts of New Zealand. I imagine they're probably much further down south than they were when they filmed Fellowship. So, again, just props for being absolutely spectacular. And look, we all know New Zealand is a beautiful, beautiful place. And the other thing that really surprised me was I didn't quite buy the whole Ring as a character in Fellowship, but I totally bought the Ring as a character in The Two Towers. That thing that I think was meant to land for me in Fellowship and didn't quite landed for me here. And I think that Frodo's performance is a very big part of that.
Was it the scene where Frodo's going to put the ring on, and you just feel that if he puts it on, he's going to get spotted by Sauron and his minions, and things are going to go to hell, and there's real power with not putting it on? Was it that sort of moment?
It was the way that Elijah Wood plays it in such a way that you feel as though he's having an internal fight with the ring. And there's several points where it happens. The one you articulated is there. The one where it's looking to be handed over to another person and Faramir is trying to get it was one. When he's arguing with Sam was one. Just consistently throughout it, I could feel the influence of the ring on Frodo in a way that I didn't quite buy in the first one. So that was something that it's taken me 2 films, but I have bought that now.
That's really cool. It's good to hear. Let's get into wrap-up mode. All told, I don't think this film is as good as the first one because of the way it just continues the story and it doesn't feel like it's a movie you can just put on. I mean, Helm's Deep is wonderful for all the reasons I mentioned, and there's nothing like it in the first film, I know. But for something with a beginning, a middle, and something of an end, which does lead into something more, I think the first film is better than this one. But again, this one has some really cool new stuff of its own. It's got the CGI Gollum, it's got the Battle of Helm's Deep, it's got all of that. So I don't write it off when I say this by a long shot. But Dave, out of these 2 so far, I think the first film is better.
Oh, I think that's not even a contest. I think the first is a much more cohesive piece of movie making. And I do understand that this does have the problem of being the middle film, and although, as you say, it's got its own sort of beginning and sort of middle and sort of end, it doesn't quite feel like a self-contained story. It feels like the middle bit squeezed between the expansive opening and what I assume will be an expansive conclusion. But The Empire Strikes Back does manage to be both the middle of a trilogy and a self-contained movie, so it can be done.
Yes.
But no, I walked away from the Fellowship of the Ring sort of smiling and going, look, it wasn't perfect, but I'm glad I did that. I walked away from this one going, there were many cool pieces, but also some quite tiresome pieces, and I don't think it all quite hung together quite well. I think that if I went back and watched Fellowship of the Rings again, I probably wouldn't take much more out of it. Maybe not appreciate a few things or some performance more, as you always do when you see a film for the second time. But I suspect more with this one, now that I know sort of where the end is and who all the people are, and having spoken to you about it, I probably would get a significant portion more out of the Two Towers than I did on the first viewing. Because I think it would reward that knowledge coming into the movie.
Yeah, completely agree. And like I said at the start of this episode, it really pays off if you're just shotgunning through all 9 hours of this and you watch the first film and then you just go straight into this film. It's just seamless and it flows and it feels all so natural. But when you're putting it on a month after seeing the first film, and I know in reality I saw these a year apart, which is even longer than a month. That is true. In this case, it still felt like a month was so long that I was almost expecting this to sort of start in a more movie-like way and ease me in, but it really doesn't. It's really designed to watch as one massive film. It really is.
Fair enough.
Final one from me. The closing credits song this time around, because I didn't mention May It Be at the end of the last episode, is called Gollum's Song, and a lot of people think it's Bjork singing. And interestingly, it was meant to be Bjork, but I think she was pregnant or something, so we have Emiliana Torini doing a sort of Bjork impression, which actually isn't that weird, as I believe she's also from Iceland, so she has that accent and that feel in her voice. And I think it's nice enough. It's a spooky sort of piece, but I don't think it holds a candle to May It Be from the first film. Those are my thoughts. Dave, are you still watching the movies when these songs come on? Have you listened to these songs at all? Or are you just thinking, oh God, I've got nothing to say about this song?
I have got nothing to say about this song, and I've got to confess, I don't actually know who Bjork is.
Oh dear.
So they were very interesting thoughts from Europe. I have nothing to add.
Okay, well, those can be for the listeners out there. Well, look, we've got 2 down, 1 to go. We'll be looking at The Return of the King in a month's time. Dave, any predictions, any hopes, any dreams, anything you don't want to happen?
I want there to be more Frodo in the next one. I think this didn't have enough Frodo for me. I understand why. And what Frodo we had was good. But I think having pulled out and done epic this movie, and I'm sure we're going to have some epic action in the next movie. That makes a lot of sense. I'm totally on board with that. But I think the core of the next movie I want to see being that personal battle of Frodo supported by Sam. I don't need to see any more of Saruman. If Saruman sort of drowned and not in it anymore, I would not be upset at all. I want to see more of Sauron. And I want to actually find out what's going on. Oh, and that reminds me, the other Babylon 5 moment, when they talked about the eye of Sauron is looking at you, I thought, it's the eye of Zahadum, it's the shadows thing. Yeah. So I did pick up that reference. Thank you for reminding me of that last moment. I want it to be a Frodo-focused movie in the last one. And look, I'm sure there'll be some great battles. I'm happy with great battles, but every action film has a great battle. I think the heart of this movie is Elijah Wood's Frodo, supported by Sam, and I want that to be the heart of the next movie.
Oh gosh, there are so many things I could say, but some of them would be spoilerific. So
we'll say them next month.
I'm just going to zip my mouth
for just a month.
For a month, yeah, and say until next time. I've been Rob,
and I've been Dave.
This has been Alternate Galaxies. We'll see you next month for the return of the King. You've been listening to Alternate Galaxies, the podcast where Rob and Dave from the Doctor Who show take a look at other great sci-fi and fantasy that we think Doctor Who fans might like. You can reach us at hello@thedwshow.net, on Twitter @thedwshow, or on Facebook /The DW Show. Alternate Galaxies is an irregular podcast, so stay tuned to the Doctor Who show and other programs on our feed to know when the next episode's coming. Our theme music is called Wretched Destroyer and is by Kevin MacLeod. Find him at incompetech.com. Well, that's it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye!